off, I'm going to give a brief introduction. My name is Lee Burton. I'm the executive director for SBCA, otherwise known as Save Barton Creek Association. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for taking their time. We're going to try to go through this and provide you some details about what happened this last legislative session, the highlights, and really the important points that we think you want to be aware of. We do have a special session coming up this summer, so we don't know exactly what's going to happen on that. And we may do an update on this at that point, but we're at least going to cover what happened with the one that just concluded. So just want to give you a brief overview about us and why we're actually hosting this webinar, because I realize some of you may not be familiar with this. So SBCA was founded in 1979, so we're approaching 50 years now, which makes us one of the oldest environmental groups in Austin, and even in all of Texas. We've steadily expanded our work now to not only just cover Barton Creek and the recharge aquifers in that area, but also throughout Central Texas. And as you can imagine, after 50 years almost of doing this, we've learned a lot of lessons, and we've had some big victories in protecting Barton Creek from pollution and other issues that are caused by new development. And so now we're applying those lessons to other streams. So that's the great news. The downside, obviously, is that as we all know, the area is growing rapidly. So it's a constantly changing landscape, or I should say watershed, and there's constantly new challenges on the horizon. So legislation is one of the key areas that we work in to help provide common sense solutions to protect our streams long term. Just a couple other items here that you might want to know about us. So we were actually the leading environmental organization who supported local landowners in the challenge against Liberty Hills wastewater discharge permit. And we had a big victory in that just last year. We got TCQ to rule in our favor to actually reduce the amount of phosphorus that they're allowed to pump into that stream by 95%. Didn't go quite as far as we wanted to, but that's the first time anything like that has ever happened. So we were very excited about that. We're actually also working right now to oppose, unfortunately, several bad wastewater permit applications right here in Travis and Hayes County. And there's some other ones around Central Texas as well that we're going to be involved in. On the legislative side, since 2021, our top priority has been helping pass what's become known as the Pristine Streams Bill. So basically, this would ban any new wastewater discharge permits by non-municipalities on the last remaining pristine streams in Texas, which we've identified. TCQ knows about all these streams. And if you don't know about TCQ, that's the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. It just happens that almost all of them are in the hill country because the way our geology is here and hydrology here, our streams are, as you've ever been out on them, I'm sure you have, are very, very pure, very clear water, very low nutrient streams. That's the good side of it. The bad side of it is that makes them very vulnerable to pollution of all kinds, and particularly wastewater. So we want to keep them that way so that generations in the future can enjoy them. So this last session, my advocacy director, Brian Zabcik, is going to take you through all the details here. We weren't able to pass the Pristine Streams bill that I just referred to in this 2025 session, but we learned a lot. And the good news is that there was what was incorrectly termed a companion bill, but basically did the same thing on was just one stream, the Devil's River, which did pass. And that's actually, again, the first time that's ever happened. So we think and hope it's a great precedent. And going forward, we've already started to establish broad bipartisan support in both houses of the Texas legislature. So we're already ramping up right now for the next session in 2027 and starting to lay the groundwork of how we can help ensure that that gets that passed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the webinar. So just before we get started here, and Brian kicks off, I want to make sure and thank Jacob and Therese Hershey of the Hershey Foundation and also the Shield Heirs Foundation for their generous support. Without their support, our work would not be possible, and they've been helping us for a long time, so we greatly appreciate that. I also want to mention we've chopped this webinar up into a few different sections. And so if you have questions, what you can do is You can pop them into the chat. We'll take note of those, and then Brian will pause at the end of each section and kind of go over them. Do ask that you make your questions as concise as possible, not too long-winded. If you have some longer form questions, you can put those in, and we're going to have time about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to go in more depth and having a more open-ended Q&A. But so that we don't go through the whole thing and you can ask your question basically in context of what we're currently talking about, we will take a few of them at the end of each section. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Brian Zabcik, again, who's our Advocacy Director for SBCA. So go ahead, Brian. You got the reins.
Great, thanks a lot. Logan Lee, I got some messages from some people saying that they needed the passcode to get into the webinar, and I'm not sure why that's happening, but if you can go into the Zoom event, the passcode will be listed there. It'll be in Zoom itself, and if you can check our emails and send that passcode to people. All right, thanks a lot. Hello, folks. Yes, as Lee said, my name is Brian Zabcik, and I'm the Advocacy Director at Save Barton Creek Association. I've been with SBCA for a little over 5 years now, and before that, I was at Environment Texas as their clean water advocate. So I've been working on water policy issues for going on 8 years now. As Lee already mentioned, I will be pausing occasionally during this webinar to take questions. We do ask that you write your questions into the chat rather than speak them. And also for the questions during the webinar, we ask that you limit yourself to questions for clarification. If you're confused about something that I said or it isn't making sense, please ask that question so that we can clear up the misunderstanding sooner rather than later. And also too, if I get anything wrong or not quite right, please make comments in the chat with corrections or to let us know about those things that aren't quite right. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and get into it. And before I actually get into the bills, we're going to be talking about groundwater, because once we do get to the bills, you'll see that a lot of them had to deal with groundwater this session. And I am assuming that the audience today, some of y'all are water nerds like me and you'll know all about this, but some of y'all may not. And so I just want to go over the basics of groundwater and how it's contrasted to what we call surface water. Groundwater is what normal people would call underground water, the water that's in the ground that you pump out through a well. But in Texas water policy, it is referred to by this term groundwater. So what's the difference between surface water and groundwater? Well, surface water obviously is in rivers and lakes, and groundwater is underground, specifically in aquifers. But what this also too means is that the water, surface water, the amount of surface water that we have is visible to us and we can measure it. The water that is underground in aquifers is more or less hidden from us, and it's very hard for us to measure it. Next, surface water is legally owned by the state, and it assigns water rights to entities, in most cases cities, but also to agricultural entities. And these water rights are managed by TCEQ. Groundwater belongs to the property owner, which means that if you put a well in on your property, you can go ahead and pump all the water you want out of that well as long as it's on your property. It doesn't matter if it's drawing water from that's underneath your neighbor's property. As long as the well is on your property, you can pump as much as you want, assuming that you are able to within the permit limits, and all wells must be permitted by the local groundwater conservation district. And so this is another area where they differ. Whereas water rights are managed by one statewide agency, TCEQ, well permits are issued by 99, count them 99 groundwater conservation districts across the state. While TCQ manages surface water rights, the actual water is allotted by river authorities. They're the ones who keep a ledger of who is entitled to what and when they're getting it. There are also the following restrictions on rights. They have volume amounts and priority dates, meaning that there are senior rights and junior rights, meaning that senior rights get their water first if there's a shortage. And water rights can also to be firm or interruptible. Firm means that they always have to get the water that is in their right. Interruptible means that they only get it if the water is available. With groundwater well permits, these permits will have pumping limits, but enforcement across the state is variable. And then finally, the most important thing about this is that with surface water rights, most of the available rights in definitely our most populous areas have already been claimed. It's really hard to like get more surface water if you are in a growing area. On the other hand, with groundwater, new well permits can be issued on properties that don't currently have wells, which means that this is why we are seeing a big push in Texas to set up big wells to draw water out of aquifers that have not been tapped for this before. So on the left, you see the major aquifers of Texas. The blue curve in the center is the Edwards-Balcones fault zone. That's the one that we're most familiar with, but we also too in Central Texas are very familiar with the Trinity. But communities in our area are increasingly tapping water in the Carrizo-Wilcox, which is the pink zone to the right, and you'll hear me talk about that. The biggest aquifer in the state is the Ogallala, which is in the Panhandle, and it is responsible for more than half of the groundwater in the state. So if you really want to get an accurate picture of our water source breakdown, you need to take the Ogallala out of the picture. And if you do, you'll see in the pie graph on the right that surface water accounts for nearly 2/3 of our water supply, while groundwater accounts for a little over 1/3. So groundwater is very, very important. So as I said, with surface water, the river authorities
Hey,
can keep,
Brian, I don't think people can see your screen. I apologize. So can you
oh, I
check
would, okay.
sharing again?
Yeah, I wish someone had said that earlier. Okay, so let me go ahead and do that.
It's okay. It was working before, just not now. Now we got it. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll just go through this really quickly. This is a slide comparing surface water and groundwater. By the way, these slides will be made available after our webinar, so you don't need to like do screenshots or anything like that. This is a map of the major aquifers, and then the pie chart on the right shows the breakdown of water sources. So this is what a water ledger for one river authority looks like, LCRA. And it's not necessary to go into the details of this, but what I want y'all to realize that this is a very detailed ledger. Think of it like your bank account. With your bank account, you really want to know exactly how much money you have in the account. You want to know who you have to pay and when and how much. And river authorities can do that with surface water rights. It is very difficult to do that with well permits. It is possible, but not as much. And one of the reasons, again, is that the administration of groundwater well permits is balkanized. There is not one agency for the state. There is instead, as you see, 99 groundwater conservation districts all across the state. Groundwater is very important in some areas, especially in the hill country. This map I'm indebted to Paul Bertetti from the Edwards Aquifer Authority, who showed this in a webinar that he did a couple of weeks ago. This shows the percentage of water that comes from groundwater in major hill country counties. And as you see, it is very, very, very high. Bexar County is really interesting. San Antonio has tried to diversify its water supply. It used to be the largest city in the world that got most of its water from an aquifer, the Edwards Aquifer. It now gets a lot of its water from the Carrizo-Wilcox. However, the Carrizo-Wilcox is also an aquifer. So Bexar is still getting a lot of its water from aquifers. Uh, the Carrizo-Wilcox, as I said, is becoming a hotspot for water acquisition for cities, especially along the I-35 corridor. You'll see that in this map. This has been going on. This map was actually from a really good Texas Tribune story by Dylan Bedour that ran last month, I believe, in which the general manager for the groundwater conservation district for Bryan College Station was saying that they pretty much have to grant these well permit requests when they are requested, and that it is difficult for them to manage the amount of water that is being drawn out of the aquifer. And what may happen is that they may hit a threshold called a desired future condition, at which point they would not be able to issue any new well permits at all. So what this means is that as we tapped out the Edwards, as we're tapping out the Trinity, we're now going to the Carrizo Wilcox, but we can't trust that this will be a long-term solution. Last, I just want to go ahead and make sure that everyone understands how an aquifer is constructed, because this is a big point of confusion, and you really need to understand this in order to understand the law about aquifers. In an aquifer, the water is stored in the spaces in between the particles in the soil, whether or not that's gravel, whether or not that's fine sand or loam, as you see on the left. Only solid rock, that's the only thing that will not obviously retain water. And in terms of getting water out, you will punch a well drill down into the aquifer layers. The reason I wanted to go ahead and show this to you is that in addition to pulling water out, you can also put water in, because there is a technique that is being used increasingly more in Texas called aquifer storage and recovery, ASR, in which you build a facility on the ground. You take water, excess water, say like during like a flood event, and then you pump it into the water so that you can pull it out later. And this is a very promising technology that we're seeing more of. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and finally move on to the bills. This is a chart that is just sort of like an overview of what I thought were the 5 major areas where we saw water bills this session. The solid blocks are the ones that were enacted into law. The white blocks are the ones that were not enacted into law. You don't need to memorize this or write this down. We're going to go through each of these sections one by one. But before I do want to go ahead and pause and see whether or not people had any questions or corrections and comments on the aquifer and groundwater section. Logan, is that a no?
I'm not seeing any. If you guys have questions, just pop them into the chat and I will read them aloud.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go on with the legislation. So first of all, just some general statistics about this session. In this session, 9,240 bills were filed. That is higher than in the 2023 session, when just over 8,000 were filed. In the 23 session, 14.5% of those bills were enacted into law. We do not know the number yet because the statistics haven't been released yet. Sunday was the governor's deadline to sign or to veto bills. But when I've looked at the statistics for past sessions, they have tended to remain pretty consistent from session to session. So I think that, like we will probably see a similar percentage for bills filed this year that will be enacted into law. The key thing that I want to emphasize on this is that it is really hard to get a bill turned into a law. I mean, 14.5% means that all the rest are failures. And so that is something to kind of keep in mind when you are working on a bill or hope to see a bill introduced in the legislature, is that the vast majority of them die and never make it into law. Which bill succeeded? It will not surprise you to know that bills filed by Republican lawmakers were more likely to get passed by both chambers. And it will also probably shouldn't surprise you to know that at least the passage rate was higher for senators, but past bills were definitely Republican senators had the highest passage rate. So if you want to get a bill actually passed, you're going to significantly improve your chances if you get it filed by a Republican senator. Legislative stages. One of the things that I really focused on this session was not just trying to analyze the content of bills to see whether or not that they were good or bad for the water and for the environment, but to kind of like see how they made it through the system. There are different ways to look at the stages that a bill has to go through in the legislature. This is a very simplified version, but I think that the simplicity makes it kind of like easier to track things. You can kind of see here, the bill starts in its chamber of origin by first being referred to an issue committee. For example, a water bill in the Senate goes to the Senate Committee on Water, Agricultural, and Rural Affairs. Second, it is then heard in a meeting by that committee. A lot of bills are left pending after hearing and never move past this stage. Third, if the bill is lucky, it gets approved in a committee vote. The bill then goes to this intermediary step of the calendars committee. Each chamber of the House and the Senate has a calendars committee that schedules votes for bills for floor votes. This is also too where bills can get tied up and sometimes died. If it does get scheduled for a floor vote and it gets passed in a vote by the chamber of origin, then it goes to the second chamber where it has to repeat the same 4 steps. If the bill repeats all of these eight steps, then it is passed by both chambers and it goes to the governor. The governor has actually 3 options on what he can do with a bill. He can sign it or he can veto it. That's what we're most familiar with. But there's also too this in-between option where he can allow it to be filed as a law without his signature. What that means is that he has a deadline by which he has to sign or veto bills. For the final bills in this session, that deadline was this past Sunday. And so many bills that he neither signed nor vetoed by Sunday were then filed by the Secretary of State as new laws. So with that, I'm going to pause again and see if anyone has any questions about the legislative process or about the statistics for this year's session.
Again, if you guys have questions, you can just type them in the chat and I can read them aloud, and then Brian will answer them.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead into the meat of the matter, and we're going to talk about the bills that were enacted into law and failed in each one of these topic categories, starting with groundwater. So the 3 bills on the left you see, and also to the gray circles that you see to the bill number, that indicates what stage the bill reached if it was not sent to the governor. And it also too indicates if the governor did take action on it, whether or not the governor signed it or allowed it to be filed as a law without his signature. So I will go and say that most of these bills on the left were a little on the minor side. I mean, they're important. They definitely will like help us. I do want to highlight that HB 1633, when considering this actually stemmed from the fact that there have been a lot of cities drilling wells in Bastrop and Lee counties that have been pulling a lot of water out of the counties, thus lowering the water table for neighboring farms. And so that was the impetus for this particular bill, requiring that groundwater conservation districts have to consider the effect of a new permit application on existing exempt wells. HB 2078, requiring GCDs to show that they're on track to achieve their desired future conditions. Desired future conditions is a very hard concept to understand and to explain, but it is an incredibly important within terms of groundwater management. It is essentially a long-term goal. The GCD, the district says that we want our aquifer to look like X in the long term, generally 50 years. This is sometimes a volume amount. They want to go ahead and say, you know, like we want to have X amount of available water remaining in aquifer in that 50 when we reach that 50 years. Sometimes it is measured in terms of lowering of the water table. We don't want the water table to go down by more than X amount because of new wells pumping water out of the aquifer. At either rate, you really want to reach your desired future condition target in 50 years. You don't want to reach it in 40, 30, or 20 years. And that's what the point of 2078 is it's saying that GCDs have to show that they're on track to meet their desired future conditions when they're supposed to be met. Let's see. SB 2660, this is one that SBCA has talked about a lot, as well as our friends at the Watershed Association and David Baker. This was a really essential bill. There are two groundwater conservation districts in Hays County. The east side of the county is under the jurisdiction of the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District, and the west side is under the jurisdiction of the Hays Trinity, excuse me, Groundwater Conservation District. What is unique about the Hays Trinity GCD is that in its enabling legislation, it was not given the power that it needed to adequately manage its aquifer supply. Every other GCD in the state has the ability to set appropriate fees and rules to manage their water supply. In particular, they are able to charge what is known as a production fee, which is actually what we would think of as a usage fee. If you use X amount of water, you have to pay X fee to the district. Hays Trinity does not have this power, and that is one of the reasons why it has not been able to appropriately deal with the overpumping that has been happening by Aqua Texas in the northwestern section of Hays County. Aqua Texas is a commercial for-profit utility it is a subsidiary of a company based in Pennsylvania with a market capitalization of $14 billion. And it has blown through its pumping limits in its Hays Trinity pumping permits repeatedly. And that's one of the reasons why the water level in Jacob's Well has been going down and why Jacob's Well went dry, in fact, a few times in recent years. So SB 2660 would have given Hays Trinity the power to go ahead and charge fees. It was a modest fee. It would have been, I think the final version they settled on was 30 cents per 1,000 gallons per day pumped out of the aquifer. But it was still, like giving Hays Trinity the power to go ahead and deal with overpumpers like Aqua Texas. Aqua Texas, however, really dug in its heels and it fought this tooth and nail, and they were able to kill the bill in the legislature. It passed the Senate, but then it died in the House. However, SB 1253, you see on the right, under conservation bills, the Hays Trinity proposal was resurrected as an amendment to SB 1253, and it was tacked on at the very end of the session. SB 1253 is a really great bill in itself. It would require cities to reduce impact fees to developments that include features for water conservation and water reuse. Basically, this would incentivize more water conservation and new developments. As I said, the Hays Trinity proposal was tacked on as an amendment to the SB 1253 at the very end. That was the version that went to the governor's desk, a combination of 1253 and 2660. Governor Abbott basically waited until the very last minute on Sunday night to veto this bill along with others. And he said specifically in his veto proclamation that while he liked 1253 and he thought that that was a good bill, he thought that 2660 would have harmful effects. And it was very striking because in his veto proclamation, he was repeating many of the talking points against giving Hays Trinity this additional power that Aqua Texas has been using in its materials. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions about the groundwater bills.
We've got one question from Rachel Haynes. She asks, does HB 1633 apply only to Bastrop and Lee counties?
I believe that that's the case because it has bracketing in it, and also in the bill analysis that was submitted by the bill author, it does say that it will only apply to those two counties.
Okay. Kenneth asks, couldn't the government have line item vetoed the part he didn't like on SB 1253?
Generally, line item vetoes are only available for the budget. I believe in some states they do have a line item veto for non-budget laws, but Texas is not one of them.
All right. Sammy Seaman asks, what exactly were Aqua Texas's talking points against SB 260 or 2660?
I can share that later, but in a nutshell, they were saying that the proposal would result in Hays County taxing wells in its jurisdiction, and that it would make visits on your property to inspect wells, whether you wanted them to or not. And so the first half, what they meant by taxes, that's the production fee that I said earlier. I believe it was ended up at 30 cents per 1,000 gallons. Again, we have 99 groundwater conservation districts in the state. 98 of them can levy production fees. Only one of them cannot. Aqua Texas's way of stirring opposition to this proposal was to claim that this production fee, which every other district can do, was a quote unquote tax, because tax is a bad word that was able to generate a lot of opposition to the proposal.
Got it. Okay. And then Ben Pfeiffer asks, how is Aqua Texas able to continue to blow past their plumbing or pumping limits?
Basically because Hays County, Hays Trinity Groundwater Conservation District has not been given the legal authority by the legislature to take effective action to stop the overpumping. In fact, Hays Trinity Groundwater Conservation has actually levied fines against Aqua Texas for the overpumping, saying you overpump by this, you need to pay these fines. Aqua Texas has actually gone to court and filed suit against Hays Trinity, saying that it does not have the authority to levy these fines.
Okay. I think that answers all of our questions for right now.
Yeah, and I also too really, I mean, Aquatex it's really hard to overstate how bad a player they are. And they had excuse me, they had an ally in the legislature with Representative Carrie Isaac, who represents this district. And that was one of the reasons why it's always been really hard to get this bill passed, is because excuse me, Representative Isaacs has always been opposed to it. It's worth noting that Representative Isaacs chief of staff is a person named Terry Franks, who also too worked for 2.5 years as director of business development for Aqua Texas before going back to work for Representative Isaacs as chief of staff. All right, so moving on to conservation. This was a very popular area, as you can tell, and lots of these bills actually did get passed, which was really great. I'm not going to read these out. You can go ahead and read them for yourselves. I will go ahead and say that HB 29 is significant because that is the one bill that was passed this session that deals with loss mitigation. This is an important topic because when we talk about trying to conserve water or to come up with one big way that we can do this is by fixing our leaky pipes. It is incredible how much water the state of Texas loses every year through leaky pipes and leaky water infrastructure. The Texas Living Waters Project did a really great report on it that actually has a bottom line number for how much the state loses to water, leaky pipes and leaky infrastructure. I don't have that number in front of me right now, but I would really recommend that report. HB 517 is one of those bills where I thought, you're kidding me. We actually need to have a law for this to tell HOAs that they can't fine homeowners who have brown lawns because they aren't watering their lawns during drought. But apparently HOAs have been doing this. And yes, it was necessary to pass a law telling them stop it. SB 1633, this was a real disappointment. This would allow counties to offer property tax discounts for the installation of rainwater harvesting or gray water reuse systems. A version of this bill has been introduced in basically every session by Hill Country representatives going back to at least 2017, when it was introduced by, interestingly enough, Representative Jason Isaac, the husband of current Representative Carrie Isaac. This is a bill that really should have passed, and it's a shame that it did not. And with that, I'm going to pause about conservation bills and see if y'all have questions about any of these.
So Kenneth asks, will both bills be eligible for the coming special session?
SB 1253 it will be eligible because Governor Abbott has already put it on his list of bills that he wants the legislature to address during the special session. He called it, as y'all may have seen from the news story, specifically because he vetoed the THC ban that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was very eager to see get passed, and sort of as a consolation prize to the lieutenant governor, Abbott called a special session specifically for the legislature to come up with a better version of the THC bill. But Governor Abbott also too added a few other bills that he said that he wanted the legislature to review, and one of them is SB 1253. However, in his veto proclamation, he made it very clear that he likes the original version of 1253, which would have incentivized water conservation in new developments, but he did not like the part that would empower Hayes Trinity Groundwater Conservation District. So the answer is yes, 1253 the legislatures will be able to work again on 1253. However, it's very clear that any proposal to strengthen Hayes Trinity will not get anywheres with Governor Abbott. I do not know if SB 1633 is on the agenda for the special session, but I doubt it. I will check though. Any other questions?
That's all of our questions for now.
Awesome. So then we're going to go ahead and move on to other water sources and then to financing. Now, what other water sources means basically everything else besides groundwater. It's kind of sort of like a sign of how surface water, there's not really anything you can do with it because all of the really important water rights have already been assigned. There was only one bill that was passed this session that had to deal with water rights, and it actually had to deal with water rights involving another country, our neighbors in Mexico. So the US and Mexico signed a treaty in 1944 about water sharing for the Rio Grande. It basically says you have to allow a certain amount of water to continue to flow into the Rio Grande. You can't keep all of it on your side of the border for agricultural irrigation or for lakes or for whatever. And what I have heard from others in our water community is that this has indeed been the case, that Mexico has not let the amount of water flow into the Rio Grande in past years that it should under this treaty. The reason that I made sure that to explain how aquifer storage and recovery works is because we actually had two bills passed this session that deal with this. SB 616 allows ASR facilities in Williamson and Medina counties to drill injection wells through the Edwards Aquifer and into the lower aquifer. What that means is the injection wells, when they pump in the floodwater into the aquifer, they're actually going to be doing it in the aquifer below the Edwards. I think in Medina County, that would be the Trinity, and I'm not sure in Williamson if it's going to be the Trinity or the Carrizo Wilcox. But they will not be pumping the water into the Edwards. The Edwards has very, very strict protections on what you can do with the water in there. This is, I think, kind of basically a good bill because it does make more ASR facilities possible. SB 2885 is an interesting bill. So, as I said, with ASR facilities, when you are storing and recovering water in the aquifer, generally it is surface water. Most often it is like flood water, like excess stormwater, like from the river or the lake when like you have really heavy rains. And so it's like natural water that is pumped into the aquifer. This bill enables what is called reclaimed water to be injected into aquifers if it meets the standards of the U.S. Safe Drinking Water Act. Reclaimed water is a euphemism that is used a lot in water policy for treated wastewater. Now, there's no reason that this should not be done because treated wastewater is discharged into a lot of surface features, rivers and lakes that are later used for drinking water. One of the standard jokes among Texas water nerds is that Houston is drinking the pee of Dallas because Dallas is discharging its treated wastewater into the Trinity River, which flows into Lake Livingston, and that's the main source of drinking water for Houston. So if we do this on the surface water lakes and rivers by discharging treated wastewater into the surface water features and then pulling it out later for drinking water, then it should be okay to do that into ASR facilities. I became very interested in this bill when I found out that the city that wanted to try to do this is Temple, and that's where I live right now. Not in Temple, but I live on my family's farm east of Temple. And so, in fact, this ASR facility that Temple has is probably very close to where I live right now. So getting on to financing, these are the big bills. The first two are the big bills that you will have seen in all stories about water legislation this session. HJR 7 and SB 7 are related. Essentially what this is about is appropriating $1 billion a year to the Texas Water Fund. This money will be taken from the state sales tax revenue. It will be put into the Texas Water Fund, and it will have to be used specifically for water infrastructure projects. Because this is mandating an annual appropriation, it has to be approved by voters as a constitutional amendment. And so that's what HJR 7 does, is it authorizes the constitutional amendment to be put on the ballot. And so you will see that this November, and you should vote yes on this because this is very, very important. Assuming that Texas voters do go ahead and approve the constitutional amendment in November, then SB 7 will kick in because this is the enabling legislation. This will direct the Texas Water Development Board to fund projects that are loosely under the category of quote unquote new water supply. There are three that state legislators have been very keen on. One is desalination plants to be built along the Texas coast. The second is the reuse of what is called produced water, which is actually just the wastewater from fracking operations. If you understand how fracking works, you know that water is injected into the ground, into like a shale rock formation to break it up to release the oil and gas in it. That water that you pump down then has to be pumped out, and you have to get rid of it somehow. It is very dirty water, and it will take a lot of cleaning to make it available for reuse. The third category is aquifer storage and recovery, which you've already heard me discuss. Of these first three projects, these are these were the pet projects for a number of Texas legislators. It's worth noting that desalination plants are going to be incredibly expensive. And the amount that we will have to spend to get the amount that we will have to spend per gallon of water will be much higher than any other water source. Similar with produced water. However, we're encouraged by this because late in the session, this funding was expanded to include water reuse projects, and water reuse means specifically wastewater reuse. And here wastewater means basically municipal sewage. This is something that SBC and our partners in the Wastewater Conservation Coalition have been pushing for a long time, that we need to be doing more water reuse. And we're really glad to see that this will be funded through this new fund. And then finally, SB1, that is the budget bill, the bill for all of the state agencies. Article 9 of this does have a clause in there that directs TWD to spend $7.5 million over the next 2 years to fund science, research, and innovation by GCDs. This is incredibly important, in part because of what I said at the beginning about how water in aquifers, underground aquifers, is kind of hidden from us, and we don't know exactly how much is in there. And so this funding will help local GCDs conduct the research that they need in order to find out just how much water they have left that they can permit out. With that, I'll pause and see if there are any questions on these.
Kenneth asks, is SB 2885 applied statewide? Thinking about drought in Corpus and the potential of big storms from hurricane season being channeled for ASR.
Yes, it is. It is applied statewide.
Steve asks, could treated wastewater be injected into a groundwater aquifer concentrate PFAS?
Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide to talk about water quality. Because actually, this is one of if you've seen the news stories, this is one of the big emerging issues in wastewater, treated wastewater, and the use of treated wastewater is the fact that most wastewater in most cities contains at least some levels of PFAS, PFAS, which is actually a category of like not just thousands, but tens of thousands of chemicals. They're used a lot in manufacturing because they have benefits. They have properties that manufacturers like in their products, a huge array of products. Teflon coating on pans is like one example. The thing is that these PFAS chemicals are also called forever chemicals. And what that means is that they never break down. You know, like a lot of chemical substances will break down in the environment or even in our body over time. But PFAS chemicals, because of they have strong molecular bonds, they take forever to break down. And it's possible that they may be causing, you know, like some health effects. HB 1674 was filed by Representative Kerwin from Johnson County, and that is the place that has been in the news a lot where cattle have apparently died or gotten ill after grazing on fields that were fertilized with fertilizer made from sewage sludge that contained PFAS chemicals. Kerwin's bill would have created a criminal penalty for making or selling fertilizer from sewage sludge containing PFAS chemicals above set levels. That made it to a committee hearing, but did not advance any further. There was a second bill, SB 768, which did not get any traction at all, that would have directed University of Houston to conduct a study on the effects of PFAS chemicals on public health. And so where I would leave this right now at PFAS is that we really don't know, but this is what their effects are. But we do need to address this because PFAS chemicals are showing up in treated wastewater. And in answer to Steve's question, I think that the levels in water, in treated wastewater, are low, and have not been shown to cause any bad health effects. The bad health effects that we have seen so far have been from products made from the biosludge, from the sewage sludge that is collected at the bottom of sewage treatment tanks. And that's very, very concentrated. It's also worth noting that Austin does not have any drinking PFAS chemicals in its drinking water. The reason for that is because all wastewater discharge permits were prohibited around the Highland Lakes in 1986. And because of that, all of the plants around the Highland Lakes since 1986 have had to use what are called TLAP wastewater irrigation permits. And the upshot is that there are no PFAS chemicals in the Highland Lakes water, which is where we get our drinking water supply. On the other hand, PFAS chemicals have been tested in the drinking water for every other major city in the state. And so that leads me to kind of like the final thing that I want to mention, which is various proposals to discontinue new wastewater discharge permits on selected streams. Lee already mentioned SB 1911, which was one that we worked with Senator Sarah Eckhart on in this session. This would have directed TCQ to discontinue issuing new discharge permits on the last remaining pristine streams in the state while continuing to issue new wastewater irrigation permits. This was essentially a refiling of a bill from 2021 that was carried by Representative Tracy King and that was passed by the House on a 21 vote majority. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get traction on it this year. However, a much smaller version of the bill that only protected one pristine stream, the Devil's River, did pass, and that was HB 3333. However, it's worth noting that this was, of all of the bills that I've looked at so far, the Governor Abbott signed all of the wastewater bills that made it to his desk. Either signed or vetoed them. This was the only bill that he let become law, filed into law. This was the only one that he let get filed as a law without a signature, which indicates that he apparently had some reservations about it, but he wasn't going to block it entirely. And so I think that that's one thing that, like Lee talked about at the beginning about some of the lessons that we learned this session about how to advocate for the Pristine Streams proposal. In terms of positive messaging, one of the other things that we learned is that even a very narrowly focused bill like this one still had some stickiness and still kind of struggled at times to get through the legislature, which is why SBCA is recommitting ourselves to basically going for the whole enchilada in the next session in 2027. When we will be working with legislators to refile the Pristine Streams bill again. And with that, I'm going to stop and basically at this point, we're going to go and open it up for all questions and comments.
We've got a couple questions already. Peter asks, will SB 7 be funding HB 49? Also, will the Texas Railroad Commission and TCEQ be revising their standards to cover the additional chemicals in produced water?
Okay, I don't have all the bill numbers memorized. I think HB 49 is the one that says that oil field operators can't be held liable for any bad effects of reusing produced water or of discharging produced water. And
Rachel says HB 49 is the preemptive liability shield for produced water.
right. Yeah. So yeah, so Rachel and I are both on the same page. So can you go ahead and repeat the question because it had to deal with SB 7, which was the big funding bill.
Yes. Will SB 7 be funding HB 49?
I wouldn't put it that way. This is how I would phrase it. SB 7 is going to be funding facilities for the reuse of produced water, aka fracking wastewater. HB 49 will say that those facilities cannot be held legally liable for any problems from the reuse of their produced water. So I wouldn't say that SB 7 is funding HB 49. They're like separate, but they both have to deal with facilities for produced water. I think kind of like our bottom line is that, like produced water is not one, we should be like cutting back on fracking to begin with because of the really bad environmental effects like causing earthquakes. But two, in terms of reusing produced water, it's really difficult because it's very, very dirty water. And so that's why we and other water advocates would really like to see the state spend its water infrastructure dollars on water reuse projects and on loss mitigation projects.
Thank you. And then the second part to his question, also will the Texas Railroad Commission and TCEQ be revising their standards to cover the additional chemicals in produced water?
That I don't know. I do know that my understanding is that permits for the discharge or reuse of produced water are currently under the jurisdiction of the Railroad Commission, which famously is misnamed because it's actually the Oil and Gas Commission because it regulates the oil and gas industry. So the Railroad Commission has had responsibility for produced water permits up to this point because that's with we're talking about water coming from oil and gas facilities. It's my understanding, though, that responsibility for those permits is being transferred to TCEQ because they have more experience dealing with water discharge and reuse.
All right. Kenneth asks, should there be a campaign to get some of these bills that failed added to the special session agenda?
Yes.
I don't know. I would I'd be happy to hear from other people who've like worked the legislature longer than I have, but I don't actually think that that's possible because with special sessions, only the governor has the authority to call a special session, and only the governor has the authority to say which issues are on the agenda and can be considered for the special session. So if he hasn't already put it on the agenda for the special session, I don't see that there's a way to add it.
Okay. Clark asks, are forever chemicals found in drinking water for Bastrop downstream the Colorado from Austin?
Yes, actually, as a matter of fact, they are. SBCA may do another webinar later this year on PFAS chemicals. I was at a academic conference at UT a couple of months ago for the Texas Water Research Network, and the first day's panels were exclusively devoted to PFAS. And there was a really fascinating presentation by Helen Siegel, who's a postdoc at UT, who's been studying PFAS levels in the water in Austin and the Austin area. And essentially what she's found, and she has some really good graphs that show this, she didn't find hardly any PFAS chemicals in the water as the river enters the city, as Colorado enters the city. And that's because, again, there is no wastewater discharge into the Highland Lakes. However, Austin itself is discharging its own treated wastewater into the river. So as she went down the river, she started seeing PFAS concentrations rise in the water in the river. Some of that was from stormwater runoff because there's a lot of ambient PFAS chemicals in the environment. But she also too showed spikes in PFAS chemicals as the river flowed past Austin's wastewater treatment plants. So the answer is yes. Austin has PFAS clean water because there are no discharge permits in our drinking water source, but we are adding our own PFAS chemicals to the drinking water source for the communities below Austin on the Colorado River.
Awesome. Sammy was wondering, so SB 1911 is the version of HB 3333 that would apply those protections to all pristine streams in the state.
Correct.
Steve asked, if produced frac water can be cleaned up enough to drink, why can't it be reused in the drilling?
That's a really good question. So first of all, I don't think anyone is really, even the advocates for produced water will not go so far as to say that it should be reused for drinking water. apparently the general idea among the advocates for reusing produced water is that it should be used to irrigate agricultural fields. But yeah, I mean, that does seem to be the most logical use for produced, like treated produced water is to reuse it by re-injecting it into fracking wells operations. And I thought it was really interesting. I saw a story over the weekend in which Texas Agricultural Commissioner Sid Miller was saying exactly that. He was saying, like, yes, we do need to reuse produced water, but the best use for produced water may be to just re-inject it into fracking wells.
Yeah. Awesome. Erin asks, or no, actually, this is a comment. She commented, TCEQ is revising their surface water quality standards, but I believe they are not going to provide standards for treated produced water in the new version. All right.
That would make sense. TCQ has to review. This is actually kind of like one of the main ways in which we try to like protect water quality. TCQ has to issue new versions of the surface water quality standards every 4 years. This is required under the Federal Clean Water Act. It's part of the duties that TCQ gets, that EPA delegates to TCQ. It's not going to happen in the TCQ staff are already they do it every 4 years, and so it comes out in like midterm election years. So the next update of the surface water quality standards will happen next year in 2026. They're currently working on it right now. They're only just now after the session getting responsibility for produced water. So the earliest that I would see standards for this showing up in their surface water quality standards would be in 2030.
Okay. That's all the questions we have at the moment.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and let you go. I am leaving my contact information up here with my email address. If you do have any further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Just a refresher for our mission statement. Because people always get confused about us, about why is, say, Barton Creek working in Williamson County or Hayes County or whatever. We are dedicated now to protecting all Central Texas streams for future generations through public education, community outreach, and collaborative advocacy. We also could use your support and involvement too. So if you're interested, please go to savebartoncreek.org/get involved. And if there are no other questions, I think we can call it a wrap.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you.
Thanks a lot.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I don't want to keep people, but do you know if historically, when the Texas surface water quality standards have been revised, whether the language surrounding any discharge into stream segment not degrading water quality beyond a de minimis, does that beyond a de minimis language, has that historically shifted over the years, or do we anticipate that that might change?
I don't know if it's shifted over the years. I would assume that there may have been some tweaks to it. But there definitely have been challenges to TCQ on this because, so what Stephanie is referring to, the Federal Clean Water Act is the guiding law for water quality, not just in Texas, throughout the country. And that's why we have wastewater discharge permits in the first place, is because the Clean Water Act says that if you are going to discharge something into a stream, you need to have a permit for it. And then the Clean Water Act says that if you discharge something, it can't lower the existing water quality in the stream by more than a quote unquote de minimis amount. What constitutes a de minimis amount has always been argued a lot. And basically TCQ has kind of like a loose and fuzzy definition of what constitutes more than de minimis degradation, such that they rarely find that any potential or future discharge will cause more than a de minimis amount of degradation. This was an issue in the legal challenge that our friends at Save Our Springs Alliance filed against, excuse me, the wastewater discharge permit that TCQ issued to the city of Dripping Spring. SOS was basically saying that TCQ erred in issuing the permit as is because the limits in the permit were not sufficient to prevent more than a de minimis degradation of the water quality in Onion Creek, which will be receiving Dripping Springs discharge. So the short of it is that this is something that has been argued about for a very, very long time. And, like when we've tried to get TCQ to improve their standards for what constitutes more than a minimum amount of degradation, but we haven't been successful yet.
Thank you. On that note, I'm not sure, I missed the first few minutes, so I'm not sure exactly where most folks from the group are coming from, but I would encourage people, if they ever are making a complaint, they may choose to call the number, but also do it online so that you're putting things in your own words, because in my experience, often folks at TCEQ will not, like if you were reporting copious amounts of algae and rotting algae like I have over the years, they consider algae to be normal below wastewater discharges. And a lot of folks living in the area, if they don't know what our limestone bedded spring fed streams should look like, they don't even realize what is or isn't normal. But for those, if you do know something is not right, and you're trying to report it in your own words, because often it will be categorized as not a anyhow, do it in your own words.
Yeah. For those of you who do not know Stephanie, she has been the lead protestant challenging the city of Liberty Hills discharge permit. Liberty Hill has famously been causing the worst sewage pollution in the entire state with its discharge into the South San Gabriel River west of Georgetown. And Stephanie has literally been doing the Lord's work for the past more than 10 years in fighting this. So any other questions from anyone?
I do. Just going back to 2660, I was curious exactly what kind of, if you know any numbers on in terms of like the fees and limitations that the Hayes Trinity GCD would have applied to Aqua Texas had it passed.
Like I said, there was the numbers kind of changed. The last version of the bill that I remember reading said that Hayes Trinity would be able to charge a usage fee of 30 cents per 1,000 gallons pumped per day, but not just to Aqua Texas, but to, like all of its large commercial big well owners. Another way in which Aqua Texas spread misinformation about 2660 is it claimed that this tax, not a tax, it was a fee, as we've already established, but this quote unquote tax could be applied to any well owner in the district, which was absolutely not true, because the bill made it very clear that it was only going to be applied to large commercial wells that served many customers, not to anyone who has like an individual well for their home or for their farm. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do have to say that, like the whole thing with Hayes Trinity is very frustrating because of what the governor said about the bill, because that's kind of like very discouraging to try to make another run at this in the next session. We may just have to wait for another governor before we can even like try that. But anyway,
I see.
other questions? All right, y'all. Well, we want to thank you a lot. Thanks a lot for attending. And we will be posting a recording of this webinar on SBCA's YouTube session. And we encourage you to send it out to people who aren't able to attend. We should have that up by the early next week. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and sign off. And Logan, you can go ahead and end the session and the recording now.